In the overwhelming majority of horror movies, there's little debate over who the good and bad characters are, because the lines tend to be drawn incredibly clearly. There are the hapless victims desperately fighting to survive, and then there's the thing trying to kill them. But not all horror movies are created equal, and sometimes filmmakers prefer to make things a little more soupy and ambiguous, to the extent that when we take a step back and really think about it, the supposed villain might actually be basically in the right. I'm Sean Ferrick for What Culture Horror, and here's our list of horror movie villains who were totally right. Johnny in a Violent Nature. Much like his obvious inspiration, Friday the 13th's Jason Voorhees, there's an innately sympathetic quality to In a Violent Nature's Johnny, considering all the guy wants to do is left alone to rest. Johnny's tragic backstory is that he was a developmentally delayed boy who fell to his death during a prank gone wrong, and when his father confronted one of the individuals responsible, he too was killed, with both deaths being subsequently covered up. And though Johnny returns as a vengeful, undead revenant, the key to keeping him napping in the dirt is to leave his prized locket, which was given to him by his mother, hanging on the remains of the fire tower where he died. The film literally begins with the central characters picking up the locket, triggering Johnny's awakening and subsequent rampage. Now, did those kids deserve to get brutally torn apart? Not really, as they weren't to know that taking some random locket would rouse Johnny from eternal slumber. But, at the same time, maybe don't take things that aren't yours. Johnny just wanted to keep his stuff and rest easy, not be bothered by young'uns messing with his wares. Alpha Slaughterhouse. Just look at this adorable little critter, how could she ever be possibly wrong? We're talking, of course, about Alpha, the killer sloth villain from 2023's brilliantly monikered comedy horror Slaughterhouse. At the start of the film, Alpha is minding her own business, just slothing around in the jungles of South America, when she's kidnapped by a poacher and sold to a college student named Emily, who wishes to use Alpha to boost her popularity. While Emily is more naive than ill-intentioned, she's still paying into a system that's built on ripping animals away from their homes and abusing them. More to the point, Alpha's subsequent rampage across Emily's sorority is entirely on brand for a wild animal being forcibly removed from its habitat and subjected to the vapid banality of humanity. That's why, generally speaking, we don't do that. Alpha did nothing wrong, acting purely on instinct as animals are wont to do, ensuring her demise at the end was genuinely tragic. Alex Hammond, Prom Night. We eventually learn that the masked killer in 1980's Prom Night is Alex Hammond, who has been seeking bloody revenge against the group of kids who tormented his sister Robin and caused her accidental death 6 years prior. Alex secretly witnessed the incident and then decided to kill the 4 people responsible, which is a pretty clean motive as slasher movies go. While there is admittedly a little human collateral damage in the middle of Alex's vengeance quest, for the most part he keeps his blade aimed directly at the 4 who caused his sister's demise and then swiftly covered it up. And to complete Alex's tragic arc throughout the film, he's ultimately killed by his other sister Kim, who fatally strikes him in the head with an axe before learning his identity. An eye for an eye may make the whole world blind, and murder isn't good, but considering the uniquely cruel means of his sister's untimely death, it's easy to understand Alex's thought process here. The Ghosts Poltergeist. The central antagonists in Tobe Hooper's Poltergeist are the seemingly malevolent ghosts who terrorize the Freeling family in their home in the middle of the Cuesta Verde housing development. But the fact of the matter is that Cuesta Verde is eventually revealed to have been built on a former cemetery, with the graves apparently being moved to a new location. In reality, only the gravestones were relocated, meaning that these houses were all built on top of abandoned graves, with most of the spirits simply being confused entities desperately trying to cross over to the other side. There's really only one malevolent spirit among them, referred to as the Beast, which is more openly tormenting the Freelings and tries to stop its fellow ghosts from crossing over. And as for the rest, they're just befuddled entities, desperately trying to go their own way, and any fear or distress they cause the human family is by pure accident. Kirat Slacks. Slacks is a deeply silly film with a genuine message behind it, revolving around a possessed pair of jeans that embarks on a riotously murderous rampage. Near the end of the film, it's revealed that the killer jeans are actually possessed by the angry spirit of Kirat, a 13-year-old Indian child laborer who was killed by a thresher while picking cotton used to make the designer jeans known as Super Shapers. And so, the possessed jeans go about killing everyone even tangentially linked to the product line and its company, Canadian Cotton Clothiers. Cashiers, customers, and vapid influencers are all mercilessly offed, speaking to the notion that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, because all of these people are complicit in supporting a system designed to exploit the poorest in society. It's all the more satisfying to watch, given that Canadian Cotton Clothiers markets itself as an organic ethical brand when the truth is anything but. They freely use sweatshops and GMOs to make their products cheaply. Slacks' commentary on greenwashing and fast fashion may not be subtle, but it sure is fun to watch the gory mayhem unfold. The Intruders Knock at the Cabin. M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin revolves around a family who are terrorized by a group of 4 strangers at their remote cabin getaway, who inform them that they must sacrifice a member of their family in order to prevent an impending apocalypse that will wipe out humanity. As the tense hostage situation drags on, we see more and more suggestions that the end of the world is indeed looming, though of course we can't ever be sure that this isn't a giant hoax on the part of the quartet, this being a Shyamalan film and all. Ultimately, one of the family, Eric, becomes convinced that the intruders are correct, believing them to represent the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and so willingly allows himself to be shot by his husband, Andrew. At this moment, it's confirmed beyond any doubt that the intruders were telling the truth, and that a series of calamities did indeed take place, but were stopped the moment that Eric laid down his life. That is to say, the 4 antagonists were absolutely 100% in the right. Forcing someone to die for the sake of the wider human race was a utilitarian move rather than an act of evil, as horrifying as it still was. Marty Ranson, Slaughter High. Slaughter High is a 1980s slasher film revolving around a group of adults who are invited to a high school reunion, only to find themselves pursued by a masked killer. The rub is that said killer is Marty Ranson, the outcast the adults bullied at school a decade prior. And this isn't just a case of someone refusing to let go of the past. No, these kids straight up abused Marty, from cruelly pranking him in order to mock his naked body, to physically attacking him, poisoning him with laced drugs, and finally causing his face to be disfigured with nitric acid. Marty is physically and emotionally hollowed out then, so it's rather easy to sympathize with his revenge plan. Even accepting that murder is definitely wrong, these people ruined Marty's life and swiftly moved on with their own. What the kids subjected Marty to wasn't mere garden variety schoolyard bullying, and if you mess with the bull you should expect to get the horns. Did Marty go overboard? Yes. But were the targets of his ire complete human garbage? Also yes. Grace, The Lodge. 2019's The Lodge immediately makes the audience distrustful of Grace, given that her relationship with Richard is implied to be behind the suicide of Richard's estranged wife, Laura. Furthermore, we swiftly learn that Grace has a traumatic past, having been raised in a cult and ultimately being the sole survivor of the cult's mass suicide. She's perfectly teed up to be the villain then who will antagonize Richard's children, Aiden and Mia, when they end up snowed in at a lodge together over Christmas. Grace's mental state spirals throughout the film, though it's eventually revealed that Aiden and Mia have actually been gaslighting her the entire time, drugging her, hiding her medication, and faking strange sights and sounds around the lodge to impact her sanity. The siblings only realize too late the gravity of what they've done, as without her medication, Grace becomes convinced they're all now in purgatory. This prompts her to kill Richard, with the ending implying she will also kill the kids and then herself. This is a classic case of F around and find out. Grace didn't ask to be raised in a death cult, nor psychologically abused by her fiance's sociopathic children, and those kids ended up paying the price for their actions. Pumpkinhead. Pumpkinhead revolves around Ed Harley, a man who loses his young son in a dirt bike accident caused by a group of reckless teenagers, who then decide to cover the crime up. An incensed, grieving Ed then visits a witch, Haggis, who promises vengeance but only at a steep price, as she helps him resurrect the demonic entity known as Pumpkinhead. Now, to be clear, Pumpkinhead is a monstrous, basically unstoppable killing machine, no question, but it's not really malicious in the traditional sense. It was merely summoned and asked to kill the teens by Ed, and it largely fulfilled that request. Ultimately, Pumpkinhead is really just a mirror to humanity's own ugliness, quite literally, given that Pumpkinhead's appearance later becomes more human while Ed's becomes more monstrous. The two are now tied together. The creature is basically just a tool that's conjured to do a job rather than an entity with its own agency, and so it's honestly tough to throw much judgment its way.